nobody gets married expecting to get divorced. No one has children expecting that there's not going to be two parents there. Everybody starts off expecting that everything's going to work out. And when it doesn't work out, that's very emotional because you worry about what's going to happen to the children. Am I going to have enough money to live on? Where am I going to live? These are huge, huge things in anybody's life. So the first thing that we do is listen and acknowledge that what they're going through is difficult. And then what we do is we explain to them that marriage is a contract, and the way that the court approaches it is without emotion. They look at it as a contract.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of New York 100. I'll just get right into it. Understand the emotion that you're at right now, and thank you for clicking through to that video. We're gonna give you straight the information that you need to move forward. Just for to remove any just general sentiment or bias, or I just want to give you the facts about the process of prenuptial agreements or divorce, or maybe the family court system. All the information that you need to navigate you through your journey, and some general information to take on, right? So the first thing is that disclaimer, this is for general educational purposes only. Should you need specific services tailored for you, then you can always reach out to Sandra or get in contact with her via your phone or through their website so they can really assess your situation, all right? So first off, Sandra, thank you for doing this. I appreciate this.
Thank you for getting the information out to people.
No problem. And speaking of information, I dug into your background a little bit, and I understand that you started off in biology.
Yes.
And then medical practice, right? So before we actually get into the interview, and guys, I will be leaving show notes. So if there is a specific question that you want to get answered, I will leave time notes in the description below. But if you want to just come along for the conversation, we're going to be dropping nuggets left and right. So it'll be a good lesson for you. So first off, Sandra, again, biology, started off as a medical practitioner. So I
was never a medical practitioner,
okay,
but I did start off, I was a biology major. Okay. I was pre-med in college. I always liked helping people. And to me, that help was, at first, I thought it was going to come in the form of being a doctor, which once I started doing that, it wasn't for me, even though I had worked in a hospital for a little bit while I was in college. I enjoyed it. I liked learning how to read medical records, but being a doctor wasn't really what I thought I was going to do. So then I went to nursing school. Didn't like the way the hospital smelled once I got into my clinicals. So I then started working for the American Diabetes Association. And I was basically a secretary there, but in those days it was typewriters. I wasn't a good typist. And one of my friends said, why don't you take the LSAT and go to law school? And I thought, that's a good way to help people. So that's what I ended up doing. I took his advice right away, went to law school, loved it, and I still love it. And I love what I do every day.
So what was that transition like from a biology major into the legal field? What was the transition that you had to personally make?
The thing that's interesting about the legal field is whatever background you have, you bring that into what you do, so nothing's lost. So all that information that I gained from learning how to read medical records and understanding the medicine, I use it every day. Because when my first job was in a medical malpractice defense firm, which makes sense. Well, now I'm a family law lawyer, but there are all medical issues going on in people's lives every day. If someone's accusing another spouse of having mental illness, for example, and medical records come in, I'm able to read those medical records because I understand the medical terminology. And maybe what they're claiming proves that there's a mental history might actually show that there is no mental health issue because I know how to read the records. So I use that, nothing is lost. The other thing is I was a psychology minor in college, so because of that, I understand how to deal with very emotional people, and my clients are emotional. What is more emotional than your children and your money, which is what you deal with in a divorce. So people come in, they're very upset, and because of my all the courses I took in psychology, I know how to calm them down. I know how to get them to focus on what we're trying to do. And I feel everything, all my life experience has helped me to get to where I am now.
And I definitely want to touch on that later on in the interview about, just maybe the personal aspect of what you do as well. But so you went from the medical background, transferred into law, and I want to just name off some of the accomplishments that you've had. You've been featured in the New York Times. You've been on the Long Island Business, like top 50 businesses or here in top 10 businesses here in Long Island. Top 50 women in businesses here in Long Island. A lot of accolades, a lot of awards, and you've been able to establish quite a reputable law firm here in New York. So today we're going to be talking about mainly just family court law. So, but what are just the general practices or the practices that you do in this law firm?
My different practice areas?
Yes.
So in addition to family law, we also handle medical malpractice. I guess that's not a surprise doing that. Personal injury and residential real estate closings.
Okay, brilliant. So take me through that journey. So you originally started off as a secretary, and what was that like? In a medical.
It was at the American Diabetes Association.
Okay. Then you transferred into law. So how was that? How long did it take for you to actually build this what we have here? So what was that gap?
I've been practicing now for 26 years,
okay.
so
Okay.
it's been a long time.
Right.
I've had this firm for 7 years. Before that, I was in a partnership for 17 years. And before that, I worked for a sole practitioner and worked at the big firm where I started my career. My first job out of law school was at a large medical malpractice defense firm.
And as you kind of like build and expand and your team grows and you have more attorneys and more assistants and beautiful office. Beautiful office, by the way. I love it.
Thank you.
And then as it expands, how do you ensure that your personal aspect is still going on in your firm?
Well, I talk to all of the attorneys, do the things the way I do them. I have very specific rules. They first come with me to everything to see how I do it. We first speak with our clients. When we meet with them for the first time, people are so emotional. They just want someone to listen to what's happening. So I tell all the attorneys when we first meet with a client, we listen without interruption. We let them get their story out. We don't rush them. And then once they tell us what's going on, then we ask clarifying questions to find out exactly what the issues are. Before they leave, after that first consultation, they have a plan. So that method is followed by every single attorney every time. The other thing is we answer all of our phone calls, emails, text messages in a timely manner. No one's ever waiting to hear from us because we respond to them. We do things in a team approach so people aren't left waiting for us to contact them, which is the most common complaint that we hear about attorneys. They don't get back to them, they don't hear from them. So we try to change that up and be very responsive. And we have really daily meetings with the attorneys, so we all know what's going on in the cases. So that's how I ensure that people are still getting the same service that they had when it was just me, that they're getting now.
Now, I can really attest to the communication aspect. So guys, just so you know, like behind the scenes of getting people to do these interviews, it's quite tough, right? And then, but when I message you right away, the team was very responsive. And I can see how a lot of the times when I'm just coming in for an interview sometimes, but I can really see just like how a business is ran just off of one interaction. And based off the interaction I have here, I was greeted professionally. Everybody was very accommodating about the space that I wanted to film at. So I really could, everything that you said, it was backed up in my experience.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to relay that, to you as well. So, and you're expanding and you're building your team. One of the main things you said was listening without interruption. Was that a process that you had to build, instill, or like?
With my team?
Yes.
No, that's something that, so before anybody ever handles a client on their own, they're with me. So if they come with me and they're sitting in on an initial intake, I would explain my process and I would tell them, you see, I listened without interruption and I explained this is what I did. And so before they ever did it on their own, they saw me do it many, many times. So by the time they did it, and with me explaining it every single time, it was done the same way. So we just have specific ways we're going to do things. People are coming to us. They're trusting us with the most important things in their lives. And they have a situation. They know what their objectives are, but they don't know how to get there legally. And they're coming to us and trusting us to legally obtain their objectives. So that's a huge responsibility. It's not lost on us that they're putting all this trust in us. And because of that, we have to do it right every single time.
So when you say us as attorneys and lawyers, so what makes a great attorney to work with from your standpoint? What does that make or break factor that you think a client should look for in an attorney?
The attorney is always supposed to be the advocate for the client. It's not about the attorney, it's about the client. So if an attorney is just fighting with the other attorney and you as the client are getting lost in the shuffle because the two attorneys are fighting, that's not really achieving your objectives. So what you want is an attorney that's listening to you, an attorney that understands what your objectives are clearly, that when they speak to you, you could tell that they've read your file, they've looked at your emails, they understand what the issues are in your case. And then you need someone who has the strength to advocate for you strongly. Because when you go to court, you got to have another attorney, you got to have a judge. You could feel like you're being bullied by everybody. Your attorney is your voice. They have to be there standing up for you when you can't do it for yourself. So you really need somebody strong and someone who's going to do that, not someone who's just going to let maybe another attorney or your spouse or the adversary walk all over them. You have to know what your objectives are and that they're going to be able to accomplish them.
So 7 years with your own firm. You said 17 years practicing with
a partner. Yeah.
And then you have your own experience. You said before that. So not general question. So question, right? So you take 100 random people, different genders, different races, different tax brackets. You take 100 of them, put them in a room. How many of them would you say should need a prenuptial agreement?
Out of the 100,
out of 100 pool of random people.
I'd say probably 30 to 40.
Okay.
So, I wouldn't say everybody needs one. I think that definitely second marriages, you should have a prenup. I think if you have significant assets, you should have a prenup. I think if you own your own business, you should have a prenup. Or if you own any separate property, a house, you should have a prenup. But generally, two people that are just getting married with no assets at all, there's really no reason for a prenup yet. But sometimes people might get a postnup.
Yeah.
So
I was going to ask about that in the future question about prenups and postnups. But so just so I clarify here, so not everybody should get one, around 30%, but mostly if you are in your second marriage, you have assets such as homes and different nature like that, and then you said having your own business.
Right.
Okay. So.
And assets could be retirement benefits that you have before from a job before you get married. That could be another reason to have a prenup, that you want to keep that separate. That's a tough thing for people, dividing up. In a divorce, the spouse that never worked at the job gets 50% of the marital portion of the retirement assets. And that's very difficult for people to understand. They're like, wait, I worked all those years for my retirement. Why do I have to give 50%? And that's the way the law is. So if you want to keep that separate, a prenup would be a reason to do that.
Okay. So first I want to ask, just from the lawyer's perspective, like the actual definition, like what is a prenup?
Okay, a prenuptial agreement is a contract that says what property is separate property and what will happen after you get married. So, for example, you could have a house that's separate property, but you might say after 10 years of that marriage, you don't mind it sharing it with that spouse, but maybe the first 5 years before you know if everything's going to work out, that house is going to stay your separate property. So a prenup keeps your separate property separate and says how you want to divide up that separate property in the future.
Now, just how do you handle that as a lawyer when you get two people in the room who want to do a prenup? How do you navigate that? Because obviously not both parties may want a prenup. Do you find a way to navigate through that?
So when I meet with them, I'm only meeting with one of the parties. I wouldn't be representing both because that would be a conflict of interest. Okay. So by the time they come to me, there's already been a decision made to get a prenup. Usually the person with the assets is the one that wants it. The person who doesn't have the assets can get their own attorney, or they could decide not to get their own attorney. Either way, they would get a copy of the agreement to review, and they would have their input. If they have an attorney, that attorney would call and let us know what changes they want to be made on behalf of their client. And if the person was representing themselves, they would usually just tell the person who's our client what changes they want, and that's all negotiated.
So these people are actually in different, like, it's like separate entities trying to, it's not just one person, it's kind of like two entities trying to figure out an agreement.
Right, well, usually if somebody comes to me and they say, I want to keep these certain assets separate, but these I don't mind sharing, I'm the one that comes up with the agreement. Once they have the agreement, then they can give it to the other future spouse, and then they could bring it to their own attorney if they choose to. One of the important things about a prenuptial agreement is that all the assets have to be disclosed in order for it to be effective. So someone can't hide what assets they had and just keep that all a secret from the other spouse, because they have to know what they're waiving their rights to.
And then, well, you've been in this industry for long, so like, do you think this, I guess it's an opinion question, do you think a prenuptial agreement strengthens a marriage? Does it makes a marriage more? What do you think a prenuptial agreement actually impacts on a marriage?
I think that people are scared of prenups, that they don't want to say anything because it doesn't feel romantic to say that, and maybe you're assuming that you're going to get divorced. But really what it does, it takes the stress off of the marriage, because if a person's saying, I don't care about your assets, I'm just marrying you because I love you, and the other one, say for example, has assets from a family, and the family is concerned that they don't want all these assets going to a spouse until maybe they've been married for a longer period of time, it takes the stress out, that will stay separate. It's not an issue in the marriage. Everybody knows, and nobody's assuming that one person is trying to get something from the spouse. And so I think if it's approached correctly, it's fine. If it's not, if the parties don't speak about it first, and they just say, here, sign this, I think that's very bad. And people aren't going to like that.
Gotcha.
But if it's a discussion, if the person's, for example, in the second marriage, they know that the person has a business, they know that they have assets, and they say, I love you, I want to get married, but I just want to make sure that my business is protected, and they have a reasonable discussion, most people, that'll be fine. It's just when they're surprised with it that it's difficult.
Okay, so, all right, I guess so.
In most situations.
So the discussion beforehand, before approaching a lawyer, is recommended?
Absolutely. Okay.
And then but how strong is a prenuptial agreement and a divorce court? Because can it be...
If it's written correctly and has all the requirements, for example, disclosing all the assets, it's enforceable. And it's always regarded, it's always considered in the divorce proceeding. It's to make everything less stressful in the event of a divorce. The prenuptial actually says, if we divorce, here's what happens.
And so I don't hear a lot of conversations about postnuptial agreements. So like is there a different, like, I guess, process? I know it's the same, essentially, from my understanding, you want to kind of, I don't even know what it is. Let me not even say that. So what's the difference, I guess, between a postnup and a prenup, like just the process of it? Like,
so the simple difference is that a prenup is before you get married, a postnup is after you get married. And sometimes you have a postnup instead of a prenup simply because you didn't have time to do the prenuptial agreement, and you just didn't have time to negotiate it. But sometimes something happens, for example, one party has an affair. And usually once that happens, the party who did not have the affair feels like, I want to get a divorce. And maybe the person who had the affair is remorseful and they want to keep their family intact.
Gotcha.
Very good time to get a postnup, because a postnup says, okay, I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to try to work it out. But if anything happens again, here's how we're going to divide everything up so that I don't have to worry about what's going to happen.
Gotcha.
Am I going to be able to stay in the house? Will I have money to take care of things with the children? So that's another reason why a postnup is done.
And just so, I remember you have this amazing, I'll leave the link for it. I'll leave some animation for their Instagram. You do these 1-minute bits, a 1-minute legal tip
tip of the week,
legal tip of the week, right? And I believe you mentioned something about like pets, right? So what are some of the, I guess, unique things that can go in a prenuptial agreement that people just maybe it might miss their mind? Like, what are some of the things that you can kind of think of that?
Well, one of the things that's very interesting that we're putting in prenups and postnups is a social media clause.
Wow.
Because a lot of times there's revenge social media that people put out. They do things to hurt their business reputation of somebody, maybe put pictures that you wouldn't want people to see, say things about them. When we put a clause within the prenup or within the postnup that says that what they can and cannot do on social media. And they can't do anything that's going to injure the reputation or the business or the personal and who they can post to. And that's something that's new, but something that's needed when you think about what happens. You could post something about someone, it could really ruin them. And that's a unique thing that we put in there.
So, we discussed prenups, and then postnups, you said can be a tool to help re-strengthen, that marriage. And then what if someone's at the point where it's not working out, and they have a trigger in their head and they want to take that step? What do you think if someone is just, if you're watching this video right now, and it's just kind of like literally like that clock is kind of like in your head just a little bit, a faint, the decision. When do you think it's the time to actually make a initial step?
I couldn't tell somebody when to get a divorce, but if you know that you feel like the marriage is over and it's not salvageable and you want to get a divorce, planning is always very important and helpful, especially if you're not what the law calls the moneyed spouse, meaning that your spouse is the one that's is the main breadwinner, and you maybe make less money and you know that you couldn't do it on your own. You have to plan. You have to know what your numbers are. What are the bank accounts? What do the tax returns say? You should know how much money you need to live on after a divorce. You should know what all your expenses are, what the children's expenses are. And those are very important things, because if you come into the first consultation with that information, it's much easier for the attorney to formulate a plan for you going forward.
So is it safe to say that maybe if someone is on their mind, is it okay that they should still maybe, and if they want to, they can still maybe address an attorney like yourself, just to understand where they're at in their position?
A lot of times people come in for a consultation, they say, I just want to know what my rights are.
Okay.
Like what happens, or sometimes people aren't married, but they've had children together, and they're concerned that something's going to happen and they're not going to be able to see their children. They want to know what their rights are with regard to the children. And it's a very smart thing to do. Before you make any decisions, just know what are your rights? What are your rights as a parent? How often are you allowed to see the children? Like, what are you allowed to see the medical records? Are you allowed to still participate in school activities with the children? Those are things that people wonder about. They might not know the answers to. And sometimes one spouse, or maybe one parent, in the case of where they weren't married, might take the children and say, well, you're not allowed to see them on the holidays or whatever. And the other parent, who's kind of left out in the cold, feels like they're going to just take what they can get and accept it, without realizing that if they went to court, they can actually get a schedule that gives each of them an even amount of time.
You said that previously one of your main strengths, or one of the main, I guess, the culture here in the team is to just listen without responding, right?
Without interruption.
And without interruption. So let's just say someone wants to go through with a divorce. What are the first 3 steps that you'll take them through? Since once they come here, and what's the first 3 steps?
Well, after they tell us their story, we identify what the issues are. So, for example, if there's children, have they discussed with their spouse or with the other parent what they want to do with custody? Who's going to be the main custodial parent? Are they going to share it? There's 3 types of custody. There's sole custody, meaning that one parent has custody and sole decision making, and the other parent would have parenting time maybe one day during the week and every other weekend. The second time is joint legal custody with residential custody to one parent. So that's joint decision making. And then the other parent, again, the children would be mainly with one parent, with the parenting time of the other parent one day during the week and every other weekend. And then there's joint legal and residential custody, where each parent has the children an equal amount of time physically, and then they also have joint decision making. So we identify if they've discussed anything. If they haven't, we explain what the 3 types of custody are, ask them what is it that they're interested in. And they usually have a pretty clear idea of what that is. We determine what the assets of the marriage are. If there's any idea that they have in their head about how they want those assets divided, we find out if they're, what each person's employment is, to see if one person needs maintenance, or that's what we call alimony in New York, is maintenance, spousal support. And we figure out all those numbers while they're there so they have an idea. If both people are working W-2 employees, so they have specific salaries, it's actually very straightforward because the court has a statutory formula, meaning a formula by law, that they adhere to that's very specific, and we plug in the numbers and we could tell them based on the number of children they have, how long they've been married, and the incomes that they make, what the amount of money they'd be getting. And once people know that, then they could start planning.
Wow, that was like, at least, that was very like boom, 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 boom. So I want to try to leave some animations that I can follow along. So you outlined just a lot of steps. This is all within the initial consultation, or
this is all within the initial consultation.
So I want to speak on this topic. I follow, NBA, and my favorite basketball player is LeBron James. Just amazing overall.
My kids too.
Really? Yeah. Amazing overall character.
Yes.
And he has, his company is called Uninterrupted, and his slogan is more than an athlete. And it just makes people think, just if you don't know, makes people think about their profession, and then usually people are more than just that profession. They say, oh, you're just this, you're just that, but we're more than that, right? So I'd like to know, like, when someone comes to you, obviously they're in a very emotional state, right? So how do you navigate through all the emotion and try to, how do you navigate through that emotion? Because at some point you're actually becoming like a counselor to them, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that the first thing is to acknowledge that what they're going through is horrible. Nobody gets married expecting to get divorced. No one has children expecting that there's not going to be 2 parents there. Everybody starts off expecting that everything's going to work out. And when it doesn't work out, that's very emotional, because you worry about what's going to happen to the children. Am I going to have enough money to live on? Where am I going to live? These are huge, huge things in anybody's life. So the first thing that we do is listen and acknowledge that what they're going through is difficult. And then what we do is we explain to them that marriage is a contract, and the way that the court approaches it is without emotion. They look at it as a contract. And there's certain things that the court's going to look at to determine how everything is going to get divided up. Whether or not they were married, same thing with the children. The court's going to look at specific factors. What's in the best interest of the children? If they're not able to agree, here's how the court's going to decide it. So we go through step by step. We let them speak, which is usually the hardest part. Once they get their story out, they're usually a little bit calmer because they got it out. And then once we start asking those clarifying questions that I spoke about earlier, that helps to focus them on what the issues are that we have to decide. Some things are already decided. Maybe they've already decided who's going to have custody of the children. Maybe they already decided who's going to live in the house that they lived in together. And maybe they already decided some type of visitation schedule. And we try to whittle down the issues until we get to the issues that aren't agreed upon, and then work on those.
So one of the things that you also have a blog on your site as well, and it's Radna. What's your site? It's
www.radnalaw.com.
All right, and then there's a blog, and there's a lot of information. One of the things that you wrote in your blog was that it's actually, what does it say? You're like the person that actually files the divorce. What is it? It has I would say like a legal edge, would you say? Or not edge, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, people do feel like they have an edge, or they have the upper hand if they start first. And it's really just because you want to be playing offense, not defense, right? So when people file first, that's what they don't feel like they're on the defense, on the defensive. But the rights are still the same. So even if you didn't file first, your rights are still the same. Your legal rights are the same. It's just psychologically, sometimes you'd rather be the person that started the action instead of the person that's receiving the papers. And that's all it is. But legally, the rights are exactly the same. So sometimes people come in and they feel, oh my goodness, my husband or my wife is the one that started the action, and they feel bad about that. But really their rights are the same. And sometimes they just feel, I want to be the one to start it because I want to show that I'm strong enough and it doesn't matter to me what he or she did. I'm going to be the one to start things moving. I'm not going to wait anymore. Things haven't been good for a while. So it's really more of an emotional, psychological.
And then whether you're on the, maybe I guess the receiving end or you're the one that's initiating it, when someone's in your office, regardless of what position they are, what makes actually a good customer or a good person? I mean, on your end, what does a good person to work with look like, and what are the attributes of someone so that if they're going through this?
Well, just like I listen to them, I would want someone who's able to listen to us.
Okay.
Someone who's reasonable, who is willing to listen to the advice that we're giving and have a meaningful discussion so that we can come to a plan together, a strategic plan together, and how we're going to approach it. And if we have somebody that's responsive to what we're requesting that they do, because there's work on their part too, gathering the financial information, whatever information that we need in order to put everything together, that helps a lot.
All right, and just to find a couple questions on this topic, then I'm going to move on to someone else. So outside of, just of the law and what you discussed in the office, right? What are some of the things that I'm going to name out? Just name a few topics.
Okay.
And I want you to give your I guess your sentiment on what people should be mindful of. So during a divorce, how should people be mindful of their children? What are some things that people should keep in mind with their children during the process?
Well, one of my legal tips of the week is children are sponges, and they hear everything that you say. And even though you're mad at their other parent or your soon-to-be former spouse, they love both of you. So when one parent is bad-mouthing the other parent, the children feel like they're put in the middle. It puts them in a very difficult situation. They feel like maybe they should be bad-mouthing that parent too, or maybe you're happier if they don't like that parent. And it's not the best thing for the children. It makes them feel very conflicted because they love both of you. So the best thing to do is to not involve the children at all. That they should love both parents. You shouldn't say anything bad about the other parent to the children. And you shouldn't be speaking about what's going on in the presence of the children, because some people may say that, well, it's going over their head, they're not really listening, they're playing their video game, they hear everything, and it affects them. So you don't want to do that to the children. So that's probably the number one rule that we try to always talk to our clients about.
Be mindful of what you say and your actions to around the children. What about in-laws?
As well, there's a few issues with in-laws. Usually, both sides, if they have good relationships with their own parents, their parents will be involved, and that's fine. That's good because you need support when you're going through something so emotional. And as long as there's a healthy relationship, or there was a healthy relationship with the children, that visitation, that time with the grandparents should continue. Sometimes when it's very contested, or there is a lot of acrimony between the grandparents and the parents, that could be a problem, but grandparents' rights is another thing that we help with also. The court says they look at the best interests of the children. Even if there's acrimony, meaning that the parent of the child doesn't want the child to see the grandparents anymore, if the grandparents can prove that they had a relationship with the children, and they do that by pictures and showing things that you've done together, the courts will enforce a continuation of that relationship.
And lastly, but definitely not least, how do you go about helping out someone with their just overall mental stability and their mental health?
Well, they should see if they're having trouble coping or difficulty with depression, they should be seeing a professional, a mental health professional.
All right, so let's just say watch this interview, agree with everything you said. Sandra, doing a great job, but I don't feel as if I want to pursue with the divorce system, or I might even marry. I might just avoid marriage in general because I'm a man and I won't be treated fairly in court. Now, some men may feel that. So you've been in this industry for over 20 plus years. So what's your sentiment on, is the legal system, does it have a gender bias towards women, against men, or is there a gender bias within the family court law?
I think there's a perceived gender bias. I think people feel like if mom was the one that was staying home with the children and dad was the one that was out working, that dad's no way going to get custody. And I think there's a perceived bias by people going into court or concerned about that. But at the end of the day, what happens is the courts are going to look at each gender equally, at least in New York. I can't really speak to the rest of the country, but in metropolitan New York, they're really looking at what's in the best interest of the child. And if the father is the one that's the calmer personality, that's doing more with the children, that's more supportive of the children, that's taking care of the needs better than mom, who maybe isn't taking care of the children's needs, fathers will get custody. So it's not a hard and fast rule, although I think that going in, people are very concerned about that.
All right, and I always wanted to ask, and we probably won't be able to do this during this sit down, but how is alimony or child support calculated? I never really understood that, because my perspective is if you're maybe lower income or just making a medium average income, you might be paying a few hundreds or thousand. I don't really know the numbers, but you'll be paying a certain amount. But then as your income increases, you pay more and more. And I just never really understood that, because how much does a child really need? Does a child need 5,000, 10,000, or 100, upwards of I don't know how much a month? So can you explain that? I mean, how is this whole thing calculated?
Well, the courts agree with you. And because it is confusing on how to decide, they have specific percentages in New York State, and it probably varies from state to state in the United States. But in New York State, you pay 17% of the combined income for one child, 25% for two, and that's child support. And for maintenance, there's also a specific formula. It goes based on income. When you get to higher net worth cases where people are making millions and billions of dollars, well, they don't use that statutory formula anymore. They look at what the expenses of the children are, and they try to maintain the expenses, and they're shared on a pro rata basis, meaning that the percentage of income that each parent makes, that's what they contribute towards the expenses of the children.
Just to make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, for the general population within, I guess, the minimum wage to around 150,000, it's 17%.
Yeah, there's a statutory cap in New York of $148,000, meaning that's the cap. Okay. And the court can go over the cap. So say anywhere from, $30,000 to say $300,000 to $500,000, you're probably using the statutory guidelines and going up to the cap or over the cap, depending on how they make the money. When it gets higher than that, and sometimes even if you're higher than $300,000, they might just be talking about the share contributing towards the expenses of the children.
Okay, so I'm just going to have to leave this interview in the same position that I was. I still don't understand. I just don't.
Oh, so then I should explain it more
no,
clearly.
It's not you. It's the system that I don't understand.
Well, they do it just I'll explain that to you. They want the child's lifestyle to stay as much the same as possible.
Okay.
So if you're making a more modest income, your children might not be involved in horseback riding, for example, and things that are more expensive, and tennis lessons. But if you are in a higher income family, maybe you're going to private school, maybe you're taking tennis lessons, maybe you're on a team that travels. And the court tries to keep everything as much the same as possible for the children, because it's already traumatic for them that their parents are separating. So they're trying to keep everything as much the same as possible.
Okay, thank you. I almost left this interview saying, okay, I'm just going to be same position as I was before. Okay, I get it. It's about maintaining the lifestyle of the child. Okay, I got it. Of course, Sandra, I can go on further with you. If there's anything that you'd like to discuss with Sandra, you can always reach out to her. I'll leave all the links so you can get in contact. So there are a final few questions I'd like to ask all of my guests.
Okay.
And a new one. I just got this new one just last week, so we'll see how this works, right?
Okay.
So first off, I Urgency or patience?
Urgency or patience?
Yes, if you had to choose one.
Patience.
Brilliant. One thing that you had to unlearn to improve, to get better.
Interrupting people when they speak.
Really, you had to unlearn that? Okay. And then, let's just say you're going back 7 years when you first started, right? And then no, you don't go 7 years, you don't go 17 years. You go back to the Sandra that's in medical school.
Well, pre-med in college.
Pre-med in college, right. And you have the opportunity to spend 30 seconds with her. And this opportunity is coming up, and it's actually, you're traveling right now, right? But you only have 30 seconds, right? And then you're almost there, and you're about to reach that Sandra, and you have 30 seconds to say something to her. What would you say?
Hang in there, everything's gonna be great.
All right, brilliant. And then last question I like to ask all of my guests, New York, and one word.
Dynamic.
Dynamic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really do hope that you were able to take some gems from this, some information that can help you further. I appreciate you watching. If you found this information very insightful, be sure to subscribe. That would help very greatly. Like and leave a comment of what you thought, and I appreciate it. Thank you, and I'll see you guys next video.
Thank you.
Be great.
You too.